welcome to the Intriguing Beings podcast with me, Roo Chater. Season 2, Episode 4, with Robby Naish. This is an absolute belter of a podcast, a little bit selfish from my own perspective in the sense that I indulged in quite a lot of questions that were pertinent to my water sports career growing up. Some of you may or may not be aware that I started windsurfing at the tender age of 7. I think my dad, who was a dinghy sailor back then, went to the boat show and saw these windsurfers at Earl's Court, and much to my mum's possible displeasure at the time, I'm not sure, I was quite young, actually came home with a 10 Cat A Hunter windsurfing board and rig and a full wetsuit and everything you needed to go windsurfing. And what then started was a fantastic journey in my life where I had this sudden sport that I fell madly in love with, and all I wanted to do was windsurf, and that's led me to where I am now and the jobs that I have taken on and the work that I do for various people and the company that I've built as well. And along that whole path, there was a gentleman by the name of Robby Naish who was gracing the front covers of magazines, winning all the competitions, and seemingly living this incredibly idyllic lifestyle as one of the true legends of the windsurfing world. And obviously in more recent years he went on to become one of the godfathers of kiteboarding, cementing that sport in its place, and stand-up paddleboarding too. And now he's heavy into his wind wings and windsurfing. I haven't still quite decided on a name, although I'm settling with wind wings at the moment. But he's always been a pioneer of these things, and the chance to sit down with someone like Robby was pretty incredible. Now, a bit of background: I've spent quite a few years working alongside him in the kitesurfing industry, and I've sent him emails, we've chatted on the phone, but I'd never actually met him in person until I went to Tarifa earlier this summer for the Naish dealer meeting, and it was an opportunity that was just too good to miss. So I made the effort to get over there and shake hands with one of my true heroes. And it's an interesting situation to be in. You know, sometimes they say you should never meet your heroes because they'll let you down, but Robby was every bit the gentleman I hadn't even really expected him to be. I didn't know what to expect. I was just expecting this incredibly talented and successful man to shake my hand, but I got so much more. He's got a fantastic story. I mean, a lot of the things that he talks about in the early part of the podcast, you know, how he was becoming a champion at windsurfing at the tender age of 13 and traveling the world on his own, is pretty mind-blowing. I mean, for a 13-year-old kid to travel the world on their own now is a bit scary, but you've got WhatsApp, telephones, emails, communication at every turn. Back then, that just wasn't a factor. And, you know, he pursued this dream. He was ever so passionate about it, doing all kinds of jobs to raise enough cash to buy his first bit of kit. And it channeled his entire life and his entire career. And it's probably one of the most interesting stories that we've had on the podcast. And I really enjoyed the time that I got to spend with Robby. A little caveat: he was suffering from a bit of a cold at the time. So thanks, Robby, again for giving me those 45 minutes. We were also sat just outside the equipment tent, and there's a little bit of background noise, and it was very hot. So unlike some of our hour-and-a-half marathons that we do on this podcast, we kept this one fairly short because we were just sat in the sunshine melting. And it was a very kind and generous use of his time that he afforded me. And what can I say? Meeting him, he's an absolute gentleman. There's a lovely piece at the end of the podcast where he talks about what it's like to meet his fans, and I won't spoil it, but it kind of sums up Robby in a nutshell. Absolute gentleman to talk to, incredible athlete on the water, someone who's got a career spanning, you know, what most sports people can only even dream of having half of that as a career. He's absolutely nailed, and I really think you'll enjoy this week's episode. Today I'm sat with possibly one of the most intriguing beings I've ever had on my podcast, which is a gentleman called Robby Naish. If you haven't heard of him, you've probably been living on another planet, but he is one of the foremost windsurfers back in the early days, carved a huge career for himself out of the sport. and ended up setting up his own company a long time ago now that has grown to become one of the biggest provider of water sports equipment in the world. And he's still very much at the forefront of that brand, and pushing it from the top and steering it in the right direction, and always on the cutting edge of new sports, things like stand-up paddleboarding, the new windsurfs that we're seeing around, foiling as well. Robbie's always been there, especially with kiting in the early days as well.
Yep.
And he's on it. So I wanted to get him on the podcast and have a quick chat to him. Robbie, I know your parents are keen water sports enthusiasts, but when did you actually first jump in the ocean? Can you remember?
Well, I was in it long before I can remember. My dad is from La Jolla, California. He was a lifeguard at Wind and Sea, one of the pretty famous surf beaches there. He was a surfer. Started going to Hawaii in, I think, 58, long before I was born, going to the North Shore, surfing Waimea and Makaha, and, one of the pioneer big wave riders back in the day. And fortunately moved the family to Hawaii in, I think, early 68. So I was born in 63. So when I was a little kid, and I don't have a memory like my brother, who remembers everything that ever happened in his life. My memory is spotty in the beginning, mostly from little photos of me like surfing on boards. And luckily, I was raised at the beach. My dad was a surfer. He was a pioneer in the Hobie Cat days. Had the first Hobie 14 on Oahu. Had the first Hobie 16 on Oahu. Back when Hobie was big, he was 5-time 14 Hobie state champion. And I think more than that in the 16. He was 1972. Hobie 16 national champion, was second in the world several times. He's, full-on water sport guy. So I grew up around the water. I surfed as a kid, skimboarded, sailed. I had a Hobie 12 with my brother, and that's how I got into windsurfing. Was luckily meeting a couple of windsurfers at Kailua, my home beach, when we had our little Hobie 12 down there one day, and they were racing. I think there were only 6 or 7 windsurfers in Hawaii at the time, and they had put out a couple of buoys and asked if we wanted to race with them. And awesome. That was my introduction at 11 years old, and jumped on to, I couldn't even get the sail out of the water. Went tandem with Mike Horgan, where I'd hold on inside the boom and he'd let go, and I'd sail along and crash, and it just hooked me. It took a long time for me to actually be able to do it, but I'd go after school, I'd go down to the beach on weekends, and I learned by borrowing people's boards and sailing them back up the beach for them, because they'd drift down, and I'd ask them, hey, you want me to sail that back up for you so you don't have to drag it? And I'd sail their board back upwind, and pretty quickly just knew that's what I wanted to do. I still surfed and sailed and stuff, but took my life savings, worked my ass off, made paper shell necklaces, airbrush T-shirts, babysat to make money, and
whatever you could do.
When I was almost 12, bought my first windsurfer for $340, brand new. Awesome. And that was it. That was my trajectory. Just started racing locally, and won the Hawaii State Championships, which got a free airfare to the National Championships in Berkeley, California in 1976. We didn't even have enough windsurfers in Hawaii. You needed 50 boards. If you had 50 or more people enter, Windsurfer International would give the winner a free airfare.
Okay.
So guys were entering their dogs and
just to make
friends and to get enough entries. And I won that and got the ticket to the Nationals. Went to the Nationals in Berkeley alone, just with a group of friends, neither of my parents, and won a ticket there to the World Championships in the Bahamas a couple of months later. So I went off to the Bahamas at 13 in 1976, again alone, without my parents. In hindsight,
this is a very different time.
Yeah, I don't know how they did it. There's no cell phone. It was crazy, but luckily, they let me do it, and off I went, and the rest is kind of history. I won there in the Bahamas, and that gave me a free airfare to the Worlds the next year in Sardinia, and I won there, and it gave me a free airfare to the Worlds in Cancun, Mexico the year after, which I won there and got a free ticket to Florida the next year, and it kind of went through my amateur years. Yeah, and it, we weren't made of money. I needed those free airfares to do it, so luckily just right place, right time, many times in a row, until the sport turned pro in 81, which is the year I graduated from high school.
That's perfect timing.
And deferred admissions to college, and said, okay, I'll give this a try, see where it goes. And I'm still giving it a try and seeing where it goes.
all those years
So,
on.
long story for a simple question.
Yeah,
so.
but that's great. I mean, I knew some of that history, but not all of it. And that's incredible to think that, at the age of 13, you're travelling around the world on your own. And I mean, even getting kit on airplanes back then wasn't.
Yeah, well, the cool thing back then with the One Design, all of those years was One Design windsurfer class, and they provided
windsurfer.
The original windsurfer,
Schweitzer design.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So all of those years competing, and all my first world titles were on the One Design windsurfer, and you didn't travel with your gear.
It was there when you got.
Yeah,
there.
you arrived, you picked brand new gear out at the event, and off you went. So there was none of that drama that we had in the following years as professionals, dragging around 300-400 pounds of equipment everywhere we went around the world.
Yeah, because the sport changed dramatically, and it suddenly became, multidiscipline, not just about racing, wave riding, jumping, all these kind of aspects of it. When did you kind of get your first taste of, putting foot straps on and doing jumps and getting actual airtime on a windsurfer?
Well, we started trying to jump them right away. In 1976, we were out at Flat Island, trying to get the dagger board out of the water. Got the fin out of the water, no foot straps. It wasn't until 1978 that we started putting foot straps on boards. We started with boogie bumps, gluing down pieces of boogie board foam in strips to kind of push your toes agained.
Yeah,
and it went from that to the first foot straps. And that was 1978. And from then it was, the board started getting shorter. We started cutting the tails off of windsurfers, and then we started making custom boards. My dad was already making custom boards in the garage by 77. So that kind of started where the windsurfer was pretty limited, and we started making custom boards in the garage to try and make them go faster and ride waves better and everything else. So.
And you had a very glittering career as a pro, won pretty much everything there was to win out there. What was it like back then in those days? Because it's quite different to being a pro rider these days. There was a whole heap of money flowing around with the big sponsors and things, because windsurfing was on such a huge global scale back then.
Yeah, well, it grew, in the beginning, 81, 82, it was just kind of getting going. But the sport was just blowing up everywhere. Japan, all over Europe, pretty much everywhere except America. Windsurfing got huge. Yeah, America was still pretty small, which was cool because we all kind of became famous and made money elsewhere and went back home to be nobody. And so yeah, by 83, which is the year that 81, 82, we just had random pro events all over the world. We go to individual events and really good prize money, up to 50 grand in Japan in 1981, which back then was really a lot of money. Yeah. And then in 83 they formed the WSMA World Tour, which was the first unified professional world tour where there was a ranking for all three disciplines: course racing, slalom, and wave performance, and then an overall. And that is what really set it off, because there became that professional tour with events in like Scheveningen and La Torche and San Francisco, California, Omaezaki, Japan, Sylt, Germany, and that's when it really took off. Because it was mainstream media. It was a really big thing through like 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. That was really the heyday in terms of prize money, attention, big cigarette sponsors, massive events in the Paris indoor, for example, in Bercy, where, back then it was $250,000 total prize money, which, by today's standards in our sport would still be a lot. But back then it was an awful lot more than it is today. So yeah, it was cool. It was a good time, no doubt.
Did you enjoy those indoor events in Bercy, or were they a bit of a...
They were like a necessary evil.
Yeah. Because, that's quite different from riding in Maui to then, Hookeeper and then being indoors in Bercy is pretty crazy.
Yeah, the first one I went to, I was packed and leaving because it was just not right, Hitting a big metal ramp and trying to jump and destroying your boards, and the wind was gusty, and trying to ride conventional production gear just didn't really work in there. And they convinced me to stay, and I'm glad I did. It was like everybody had bought their tickets. It would have been a real letdown to just not give it a go. And we were honest, got on the microphone and said, we're going to do the best we can, but it's pretty tough in here. This is not the real deal, but it's cool to be here with you. Thanks for coming. It's really neat to be able to be here in the middle of the city and see everybody. And the atmosphere is what made it work. Like during warm-up, it was basically a joke. but putting 10, 12,000 people that were that
Screaming.
enthusiastic, screaming, and it just created an amazing environment, and it put windsurfing to a whole new level in terms of, at 8 o'clock at night on Saturday, you can turn it on.
Yeah.
And people didn't have to go out into the middle of freaking nowhere in the cold and the rain to watch you do your thing. And from that perspective, it worked. And then we embraced it as such and made gear for it for the following years, where we developed stuff that worked pretty well. In that environment, fresh water, short little accelerations and jibes, short squatty sails that only made power in the tiny little range that the fans were sitting. And, that we used production boards to get destroyed on the metal ramp, but we figured out how to actually make it work and do some, not as spectacular as outside, but, some good stuff, enough to get the crowd going. So it was a neat time in the sport.
And there was a lot of crowds involved back then in those kind of events. Did you have any favourite events from that era that you really enjoyed going to because there was good conditions or good crowds? Or
I kind of thrived on the pressure. I liked the more difficult events. I liked the conditions that were just cold and gnarly and other guys had a hard time with. Like silt.
Yeah, I was thinking that might spring to
like
your
Scheveningen when it was gnarly. We had years in Scheveningen with no wind at all, but when it was good, it was really good. Like Omaezaki, Japan, where it was just crazy windy and cold and out of control, and that's kind of what separated the men from the boys at the time. When other guys couldn't even get through the shore break, like guys that were really good at Hokipa, best wave sailors in the world, and they wouldn't even get out for their heat at silt.
Because
they'd just get washed down the beach, and you didn't know how to deal with it. Being adaptable and pliable and knowing what boards worked where and what fins to use, and to be able to change your stuff and your approach to the conditions on offer was what I really enjoyed. I loved the fact that everywhere was different, and the best guy at Hokipa didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
Just like the best guy at Pozo usually didn't have a chance at Hokipa. But overall, the one that could put it all together would end up winning the tour.
Which was the big prize in those days.
Yeah, exactly.
Overall world champion was a thing to have. And you had to be good in slalom racing.
Yeah,
and
to put it all
waves,
together. In those days, the overall was the main deal. And that was, I won it in 83, 84, 85, 86, 87. And after that, they stopped doing overall because things started getting really specialized. The race guys didn't wave ride. The wave guys didn't race or slalom. And it just became individual titles. So it was a lot less gear.
Yeah.
If you could focus on just slalom or just wave.
Yeah,
because in the day we were really carrying a lot of stuff around. I hated that aspect of it. Absolutely hated it.
It must have been quite tiring. Rocking up to the airport, never knowing what you're going to get charged if you're going to get it on the plane.
Yeah, just pull out that credit card, cross your fingers, and just the hassle. Traveling by yourself, dragging all that stuff, renting a car, piling all that stuff on top of it. It was taxing. I mean, it was cool. It was what it was, but it was not glorious. It was not rock star. It was manual labor and misery for a lot of the time.
It was only good once the competition started and you could actually get to ride it. One of the things you're probably most famous for in a lot of people's eyes, and whenever I was moving house recently and I dug out an old box and it had all the old VHS tapes that I used to watch over and over, and there was your infamous movie called Brit, where right at the beginning you're like, check out how long these waves are.
Yeah.
And that movie was just, an absolute head turner. How did that come about, and what was the thinking behind putting that together?
Just wanted to showcase, the spots in Hawaii where I was from and what I could do in them and what my friends could do in them. And at that point, videos were something that people bought. It kind of stamped the time, so to say. Like this is this time.
Yeah.
And just like watching an old video like Breakfast Club or 16 Candles, or whatever the video is back in the video days that really just stamps a time in your life where you go, God, I remember that.
Yeah.
Look at the clothes, the fluoro colors, and the jackets with Miami Vice padded shoulders, and all the things you laugh at. But I kind of just wanted to establish who I was at that time and the level of windsurfing at the time, and wanted to do it right with good music. So went out to studios and got new up and coming bands, which are now full on mainstream bands. And it was fun. And it, like by today's standards, it's still a pretty good
I was going to say,
windsurfing movie. The music's still good. The writing's still good. So I mean, obviously things have progressed, but it's still pretty damn.
Do you ever slip
good.
it in the VHS recorder and watch?
No, it's on YouTube now. You know, people have downloaded it.
Yeah,
I've still got boxes of them, but yeah, I've still got an old VHS player somewhere. But
it was great. I remember the classic line in there, which my brother, who I used to watch it with, I was saying to Brian Palmer actually, we used to watch the 1996 PWA windsurfing tour video heaps as well, and I was giving him some quotes. But is Taco Bell still
Taco Bell looking for
Breakfast
change?
of Champions?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an awesome video. I really enjoyed that, and I still, when I dig it out, I posted the cover of it on Instagram, and the amount of people who I didn't even know windsurfed back then, who I know through kiting now, were like, "Oh my god, I remember that film." It was such a, like you say, it was a real stamp on time. And then it wasn't long after that, you know, I remember I was working in the UK for Mistral and North Sales at the time. I was the Northern sales rep, driving around the country selling those bits of kit. And you brought out the Naish range of Mistral windsurf boards, which were, you know, hugely popular. Did you have any idea when you worked on that project that they were going to be as big as they were?
Yeah, I mean, I assume so, because at that point we were already selling thousands of custom boards out of the Naish Hawaii custom shop in Kailua.
And they were shaped still by your dad, right?
Well, they were, you know, we had several shapers. We had Harold Iggy and Stevie B and Rick and Charlie Wong. And I mean, we were doing a lot of custom boards during that custom board time, all hand airbrushed. And it was a neat time in the sport. So when that became available in a production construction that was worthy of putting our name on, which were the first good Cobra made, you know, Thailand boards, where they were full sandwich, light enough to, you know, really perform well and be comparable to a custom board. We figured, yeah, let's do that, and it was quite successful. We sold a lot more of those in those 5 models than we sell today with our entire range.
Wow!
So, like, a lot more.
That's crazy.
Yeah, exponentially more. That's how big windsurfing was then compared to how big it is today.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I think there's still lots of windsurfers. It's just like, it seems like it's shrunk in terms of the product purchasing thing. A lot of people are still using old kit. And
yeah, there's, you know, you don't need new gear every year, and there are a lot less windsurfers than there used to be.
Yeah,
you know, by a factor of
days,
100 probably, you know.
It's pretty crazy. And then after that, you went on and started Naish itself as a brand. What was the thinking behind that? Because you've been with Mistral and Gastra for an awful long time.
Well,
and to set up on your own, I guess, was quite a big...
Definitely not by choice. I didn't want to do it. It was 95, 96 winter that we started Naish Sales. And it was because Gastra had been bought and sold several times. And it was bought and sold. And the new guys that bought it really wanted to completely restructure. They wanted to move R&D to Hong Kong. I had a really good team that I was working with doing, you know, pretty much everything for them out of Maui. Pete Cabrina and Don Montague, myself. And they wanted to just kind of tear it apart, and they wanted to put in a managing director that I had worked with previously with another owner of Gastra years before. And I just said, there's just no way I'm going to do this again.
Go back there.
You know, and so what was my choice? I'd been with them basically since my beginnings of being a pro. I'm not going to go to Neil Pride. You know, I've always been very loyal, and I've never moved for money. You know, I haven't followed the dollars as my career path has gone. There's always more important things, you know, in the big picture that equate to a better long-term return on, you know, my time. So I said, fuck, I'm not going to stay with Gastra. I'm not going to go with Pride. What do we do? Let's start a sail company. And very reluctantly, it was a tough decision. I decided to do that. Just making sails. Yeah. That's it. So sails, mast, booms, bales, just windsurfing sails, no boards. We were still with Mistral. And we headed up all of Mistral's design and development. It was my dad for years. But yeah, bit the bullet, started Naish Sails Hawaii just as a windsurfing sail company. And the rest is kind of history. That was 95, 96. By 97, we started dabbling in kites. By 98, we were full on into it. We went and got the license for the inflated strut technology from Bruno Lagagno, who owned the patent on it. And in 99, we launched our first range of kite surfing equipment. And that really changed the whole dynamic of Naish. You know, we sold a fair number of sails at that time, but we were small. on the whole scope of things. Kiting was completely different. We were the first inflated kite surfing company doing, decent product, 4-line kites,
buy as well,
yeah, 4-line kites and depower and, things that really took it to a whole new level. So that changed the dynamic of the company in terms of, money needed and time needed and reach and scope, because obviously that first year in kiting we did way more than we ever did in windsurfing sales, and it pretty rapidly grew to the point where it's like, this doesn't make sense to stay with Mistral anymore either. We were doing kiteboards on our own and doing a lot of those, and it's like, let's just bite the bullet and take on windsurfing boards as well, which we did. Brought my dad and Harold under us, and the rest is history. We did that, started getting into stand-up in the early 2000s, slowly trying to convince people that there's a real market outside of Maui. 2007, with our 2008 line, finally got a small line of boards into the distribution, and boom, that took off. Stand-up paddling brought board riding to everybody worldwide, and rode that, until we were still riding it, but it's obviously a very different animal now, with SUPs being a commodity you can buy at the local flower shop and everywhere else. But from a sporting standpoint, obviously we're still very involved there, as we are in windsurfing and kiting.
And did you find that, with running a business, it's not a small business, so what's it like? How involved are you on a day-to-day basis? Do you get bogged down with it all, or do you kind of distance yourself from it, or are you fairly hands-on and enjoy that aspect?
All of the above.
Depending on what day of the week.
I'm the only shareholder. It's my money that's earned and lost, and it's painful when you lose it. And we've had a few bumps in the road over the years that, I don't know where my first nickel went, but I know that it was painful spending it. So I've never gone for outside financing. We're competing against brands that all have massive, investment leveraged financing and venture capitalists trying to build brand equity and spin it, and the environment is not easy to work in when you're basically cash based, having to be profitable and not just trying to build brand equity but sell good products to people at a price that works, and at the end of the day be in the black, not the red. So there's a lot of stress. I'm super hands on, especially in R&D, marketing, and again, even on the commercial side, that's my money.
Yeah.
It's when I earn $1, I share it. If I lose $1, that's all me. So it's tough, because I'm in my head still a professional sportsman more than a businessman. I have obligations to Red Bull and Quicksilver, and I'm still riding as hard as ever, and that's my priority, and the business is secondary. But keeping it secondary when there's so much at stake at this point is kind of tough some days, because it's not the tiny little thing that it used to be.
Do you still get plenty of time on the water and manage to manage that?
Yeah, way too much. We'd probably do way better as a business if I didn't spend so much time on the water, but that's where my priorities are, and I'm also hands-on. I won't put someone else in the driver's seat so I can go play. I probably should, but I'm juggling it still at this point. It seems to work up to now.
Still trying to make it work. To go back to kiteboarding, that was a really big change in water sports dynamic back in the day, and it was like 96, 97 it kind of first came out. Were you kind of drawn to it as that's something new, or how did you kind of discover it and fall in love with it?
We started playing with it in the beginning. It was a novelty. It wasn't anything I took seriously because it was a downwind deal.
Yeah, you couldn't go up.
And just like stand-up, I wasn't interested in dropping off my car and doing a run. And you'd do it once in a while just for fun. But I'm not going to do that much. And once it got to the point where you could go out at one spot, ride, and come back to that same spot, was when we went, all right, let's put some time into this. And that was Manu Berton, who was a windsurfer at the time, early French SUP guy, riding Whippicas, put a bunch of time into making boards, and finally got it that he could actually go out, ride in one place, and come back
to the same spot.
And we had been doing downwinders and stuff on like my toe-in Jaws boards, and it worked. It was really cool. You could get little jumps and go fast, but it wasn't a real sport until you could drive your car down, go to a beach, go out, come back, pack up in the same spot, and go home. And once that happened, we rapidly started developing and improving on the gear, which didn't take long because it was super archaic stuff back then. And that's when it became fun. Going upwind, jumping, and for me the attraction was flying. I could jump on flat water. It turned that waiting for wind, windsurfing, waiting for good conditions to have fun into frick. When it's not good enough to windsurf, I'm out there flying. And that was it.
Real eye-opener.
Yeah, it was all about, it wasn't wave riding, it was just going and jumping. Freaking loved getting air.
And how soon did the safety aspect come into the development? You were giving a chat earlier, and you were talking about how back in the day it was like
it wasn't
such
immediate.
a crazy thing to do. It was so dangerous. You know,
it was gradual. I mean, the very first kite we made was substantially safer than what was out there before. Going from 2 lines to 4 already made a huge difference. The amount of control you had over where the kite was going to go and when it was going to go there. Adding the D-power, the trim line, the chicken loop, made it massively safer as well. And then adding the quick release, our patented push-away system to the chicken loop, is when it went to a whole new level, because up until then you had to actually power up the kite to unhook from the harness. So if you were in an emergency situation, yeah, you could depower to a certain point, but if that wasn't enough, you had to then sheet all the way in to unhook. So with our push-away system, you know, as long as you could react and were smart enough to let go of that bar and release, you were always going to be safe. Whether your brain worked that way and would let you let go and release was another thing. People would often go, I got it, I got it, I got it, and by then it's too late.
You're already halfway across the car park.
But that was a massive step when we did the push-away chicken loop. And then, of course, since then it's continued to get better and better as the kites have gotten more D-power, more range of control through the bar feel, and so on, to the point now where it's really accessible.
It makes a difference these days. A lot of people who've only just learned, you know, in the last 2-3 years, they sort of think, oh, I'm an old hand at this, but actually they've just been riding on
so many people
with so much D-power.
So many people that kite today, the vast majority would not
appreciate the hardships.
Survived those early days.
No. It's funny to look back on it. And then when SUP came along, you mentioned you were pushing that quite hard early. Have you always been sort of drawn to these new sports? You know, coming from sort of a surfing background into windsurfing and then seeing kiting and stand-up, are you kind of one of these guys that likes trying something new?
Not usually. You know, I'm not the guy that's always experimenting on my gear, trying to, you know, like in the World Cup, I'd use my old gear until it was absolutely tattered or just not competitive anymore. I wasn't that guy that was constantly out testing new stuff. You know, I like that good old pair of shoes that you wear it until it's freaking dead. And I'm kind of that way with my approach to gear even now. It's just been through circumstance and the joy and love of riding wind and water and waves that it's gone this way. I was never the guy trying the new thing first. But as soon as I saw potential, I was the guy that got in there and with a team of smart people made it really work. So, you know, we're out doing what we do and loving it and trying to do it as well as we can, not looking for the next best thing. Yeah, and I see new things all the time. We go, nope. And once in a while one comes along and you go, there's potential there, let's give it a taste. And if the taste is good, you really look at it more closely. And luckily I've been able to do that several times. We've been in the right time, right place at the right time.
Pick the right sport.
Many times over, and have helped launch several different sports now as a result. So it's been good for me personally. It's been fun. It's been great for the brand. It's kind of reinvented myself and allowed my professional career to continue through several decades. You know, if all I did is windsurf still, I'd be a very different athlete than I am today with the arsenal of, you know, different sports under my belt that I can pull out on any given day and go work with.
Do you enjoy the learning process in those new sports? Is that something that you enjoy?
Love the challenge. It's like being a kid, you know. I want to get good at it. I don't do things that I don't think I'm going to be able to master. I don't want to be a kook at anything. But yeah, being a kid, you know, not having to grow up and stop falling down and brushing yourself off and trying it again. It's what keeps you young. So I love that part of it. And luckily our medium is really safe. If I was a motocross freestyle guy or BMX rider or a skateboarder, I'd be a freaking wreck by now. But I've been falling in water my whole life, so pretty lucky.
I was going to start talking about windsurfers, but seeing as you mentioned the injuries, have you had any bad injuries in your career, or have you been quite lucky?
Not until really recently. 3 years ago, I broke my pelvis in a kite shoot, just landed wrong. One leg went one way on the water, the other went the other way, and I did an open book fracture of my pelvis. So really bad, almost bled to death, out of the water for basically 6 months. First real injury of my entire career. And then pretty much exactly a year later, once that was totally healed, I kind of did the same thing, kite surfing again, and landed wrong and just exploded on landing and did all the metatarsals in my right foot. And that took even longer to heal than the pelvis did. So 2 in a row, kind of backed off on the
craziness,
big, lit kiting, but still do everything else full on. But yeah, those are my only 2 real bad injuries.
That's really lucky for a man that spent so much time in the ocean and in some, incredible conditions as well. I remember I had a poster of you on my wall back in the day, which was the Quicksilver Men Who Ride Mountains windsurfing shot at Jaws, and I remember looking at that. So it's not like you've been taking it easy all these years and not putting yourself in dangerous situations. So to come
water is usually pretty forgiving, but when you come down from really high and land on it really fast, it can be pretty hard.
Yeah. And so windsurfing's the new thing that you're very passionate about, and you did an excellent chat on it earlier. What's drawn you to that, and why do you think it's suddenly blown up now? It seems like everyone's got some kind of device that is going to answer this solution.
Well, they will. I mean, within a week of my Instagram post, it was like every kite brand was
on it,
making prototypes. I was just opening the door for them again, like I did with kiting and SUP, and it's all good, whatever gets people out on the water, and I don't care as long as we can, get some out there as well. I'm fine to share the love, but it's fun. It's just another way to enjoy wind and water in a new 3-dimensional, really simple way. I think everything has its time. Clearly, that's nothing new, but its time is right, especially with SUP and foils. It'll add an element to all those people that bought SUPs to be able to enjoy something new and bring them into the realm of wind that a lot of them have never really played in before. Maybe bring new people to kiting and windsurfing as a result. And then on the foiling side for us, it's just super fun, combining something that simple. No lines and bars, and simplicity for me is the attraction. And just trying to, again, get good at something new.
Yeah.
It was difficult in the beginning, but a real fast learning curve, and that's fun.
When you look back at sports like kiting and SUP when they first started, they were very basic levels of the sport. Do you think we're going to see windsurf explode into some crazy dimension that we haven't even thought of yet?
Yeah, I mean, you're limited to a certain degree because of the size and what you can do with it. But it's definitely going to advance. I hope not too quick, because like I said in the presentation today, the beauty is in the simplicity. And the race to make it more complicated is what's going to, at the end of the day, mess it up, just like it has windsurfing and so many other things. So the longer we can keep it simple, stupid, the better it is.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I've got all kinds of ideas for what I would do next. But I'm up there. And I want to make sure I don't race there too quickly and ruin the fun for where
the entry
other people will be where I'm at now, over the next year or so. So unfortunately, other people will do that because that's just the nature of the beast, especially with some of the brands that we compete against. They're going to, say this is better. If this is better, that's good, and it's like, more is not better. And more complicated is not better, and faster is not better, and heavier is not better. There's again beauty and simplicity, but in a competitive marketplace, that message gets lost pretty quick.
And your foil program now is huge. Like, you've got a vast range of hydrofoils for using with all kinds of different craft. Do you think it's the hydrofoil that's really brought all these sort of sports together at this time and made these things possible?
Well, it's made that aspect of it possible. Like, for us, the foiling is awesome. It's making windsurfing fun in accessible conditions again. It doesn't need to be 20 knots to have fun on a windsurfer anymore. You can go out with 12 knots and fly around and have an absolute blast. Same thing with kite foiling, especially for a lot of those guys that have been kiting for 10, 15, 20 years even. That They've jumped, they've, done it all. They get a little bored and there's something new to play with. They can go mow the lawn, technically, go back and forth, something new.
It'd be a challenge.
Yeah, and that feeling of flying above the water is engaging and fun, even just going back and forth, as it is on a windsurfer, as it is surfing on a swell. It's not like getting barreled, but how many guys can actually go out in a crowded break and surf really good waves and actually get more than one wave an hour? Where on a foil, you can go ride that crappy wave over there that nobody's on and get kind of that same feeling, just gliding across the water and connecting turns. And that's where the attraction is, just enjoying the water and waves and wind in a different way.
Awesome. And you've always been famous for your love of petrol and cars. And there's been a few infamous images of various craft that you've rocked up to the beach in Paia on. What are you driving at the moment, and where did that passion for motorsports and motor cars come from?
I like cars. New, old, fast, slow.
Different.
Yeah.
Did you once have a Hertz that you used to?
Yeah, a 1963 Cadillac hearse, a Eureka Cadillac hearse that I hot rodded out. I sold that in 2012. Just couldn't take care of it anymore. I didn't want it to rust away on Maui, so I sent it to a guy in Canada. I've got 7 cars at the moment. They're just kind of a crazy collection of, nothing expensive, nothing, just fun and different. Like a little kid's collection of cars is what I have. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's not investment status. It's not like, oh, look at that classic. I have really cool cars that look like they'd be expensive, that don't cost much, and I do most of the work myself. So I've got my giant truck, my International TerraStar. That is a pretty expensive car in the whole scope of things, but I wanted to have that beast to be ready for the apocalypse kind of thing. That will go anywhere, anytime, and I actually don't even drive it much because Maui's gotten so crowded. I mean, literally in the last few years, I'm thinking of selling it, but we'll see. And then I've got my daily driver was a little tiny Chevy Sonic, a little economy car. I finally gave in and traded that for a minivan. I have a Chrysler Pacifica minivan, like a housewife. Great car for just carrying my daughter and her friends, carrying my gear. The seats go into the floor so you can reconfigure it and carry whatever gear I want. That's kind of my daily driver. Then I've got my Evans, that yellow race car that I've had. It's 1991, so I've had that thing for a long time now. It's still only got like 5,000 miles on it. Kind of that timeless supercar sort of car. I've got my 1977 911 slant nose, that blue, Iris blue US 1111 Porsche that I've had now for over 30 years. I've got a 1949 Studebaker pickup truck, nice. Black, lowered, 383 Chrysler big block engine. I've got a 1957 Volkswagen Bug, hot rod, lowered, cool. Narrowed beam, big motor, baby window. Just everyone when I was in high school had hot Bugs. And so now I've got a hot Bug too. One.
Do you find that's a way for you to kind of relax away from the ocean?
Yeah, it's like the polar opposite.
It's like, obviously kite surfing, windsurfing, surf wings, everything, it's your job, and while you love it and you're passionate about it, it's often nice to have something that takes you away from that.
Yeah, I like car culture. I just like to wash them. Like I have a 1967 Volkswagen split window bus, like the classic surf bus, but mine's, lowered and blacked out windows and whatnot. I like to just clean it. I'll take it out of the tent. I'll clean it and I'll put it back, and not even drive it.
And
it's not. I don't do it to show off. It's not like I go to car shows. I don't drive through town with my arm out the window. All my cars have black windows, so you can't even see me in there. It's just a personal thing. I like them, even though I really don't drive most of them much. I just like to play with them. I get them and I customize them, and I play with the suspension, play with the engine, and put on running lights and and then you put on new wheels and tires, and I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, it's not so much the driving. It's
and then I park it, and every once in a while I go out and drive it, or drive to Peggy Sue's diner on the other side of the island and have a burger, and then drive home and put it in the garage again. But yeah, it's not a show off thing. It's not like, hey, I'm pulling up to Hokipa and honking my horn so people see me. I'm not jacking off. It's just I like cars, and luckily I'm in a situation where I can have them, and none of them are crazy expensive. Like I I go out of my way to find a classical car that I'm looking for on the mainland, 6 months looking for it, find one that works, bring it back, and then make it look super cool.
Yeah.
But it's, under 20 grand.
Yeah.
And it looks like
And
a
it's your time and
$80,000
effort
car.
that's made it look that good.
Exactly.
That's awesome. And one last question I was going to ask you about, because it's pretty hot out here, and thank you for spending this much time chatting. But you've been famous as Robby Naish, and probably one of the most famous names in water sports for such a long time now. How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis? Because does it get tiring? In the early days, was it quite quite a sort of exciting time when you're like, wow, I've just been to Japan and they know my name and they're screaming out and they want my autograph, and then after 30 years does it go, God dear, it's still happening? What's it like?
No, I mean, it's different for me. I'm still from sports that are pretty under the radar. It's a pretty select demographic of people that know who I am. And,
so you can walk through an airport without getting mugged.
Yeah, just people come, oh, how are you? I love it. It makes me, especially now, I've been most of my career really focusing on looking forward and not looking back. And I'm finally maybe at that age where I am kind of proud of what I've been able to accomplish and the fact that I'm still there. I'm not like, back 20 years ago. I mean, I'm still currently there in all the sports I do. And at 56, I'm pretty stoked with that. I might not have the exact level that I had at my prime, but I'm not that far behind it, and I'm still relevant. I have fans that met me like 40 years ago, and then I get little 12-year-old kids coming up wanting my autograph. That's cool. The fact that it bridges generations, and it's not just, I knew you back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I'd still be stoked, but I like the fact that I'm still current and I've had a good impact on people's lives. It's never been like a nuisance. I've never been famous enough that, it's given me a big head and I shied away from it. It's always appreciated. It's like, wow, thank you so much, because that's what's allowed me to do this for a living for this whole time. So I've always been super conscious and aware of how lucky I am. And the only way anyone's going to ever pay me to do this is if people like what I do. So it's a reflection that, man, it's pretty cool. I've done something good with my life that these people are stoked. So I like it.
That's awesome.
I'm not out there looking for it.
Yeah.
I'm not
claiming it
walking
everywhere.
down to the beach and holding my arms in the air and saying, look at me, here I am. I try to be humble and at the same time treat everybody with respect. I'm no better than anybody else. I'm just way luckier than a lot of people. I know how hard most people work for their money, and I've never worked a day in my life really. So gotta appreciate that beyond the business.
I'm sure you work pretty hard, but
but it's different.
It doesn't feel like work.
It's different. I've never had a paycheck from somebody else beyond a sponsorship dollar, but those sponsors aren't telling me what to do when I wake up in the morning. I mean, that's hard. A guy that works friggin' flipping hamburgers at McDonald's for minimum wage for 8 hours on his feet day after day after day, that is hard work. What I do is not hard work. So. And
you're a master of all these sports. What if you could only do one for the rest of your life? Which one would you pick?
Depends what conditions I'm given, where I am. I hate to pick one sport and then you stick me off somewhere with no wind or no waves.
Well, where's your favourite spot? If you could spend one place the rest of your life with one sport, what would you choose and where would it be?
I don't know. If I had to pick one, I'd probably pick, if I was stuck on Maui, I'd probably pick windsurfing. There's still not much better than going out to Ho'okipa and wave sailing. I'm still pretty damn good at it. It never gets boring, never gets old. No 2 days are the same. It's something you can do. My elbows get pretty tired, but otherwise I think I could do that for an awfully long time. Probably back to the roots.
Back to the roots.
It's nice not to have to choose, but if I had to, I'd probably do that.
Awesome. Robby, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
That's been
Pleasure.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
There we have it. Robby Naish. What a legend. That's probably one of my favourite ones so far. And there have been some amazing listens over the last year or so. As ever, please give these a like and a share on social media. Tell your friends about them. Spread the word. I've been getting some amazing feedback, both on the beaches and through social media. And a special mention to Martin Panther, who took the time to message me directly on Instagram and share a little bit of his fascinating story and saying how much he'd enjoyed listening to these. So thanks, Martin. That's very inspirational indeed. Any feedback is always welcome, both good and bad, and I really hope you have a fantastic week. Until next time, you've been listening to me, Roo Chater, and the Intriguing Beings podcast.